جان برکو، رئیس و سخنگوی پارلمان انگلستان 2009-2019 در مصاحبه با برنامه کاپیتال هیل واشنگتن تایمز 5 بهمن 1404.
جان برکو: مقیاس عظیم، گسترش جغرافیایی، سازمان یافتگی و شدت اعتراضات در ایران بسیار مدیون سازماندهی است.
رضا پهلوی به شدت دچار توهم است. ذهن او و واقعیت روی زمین دو چیز کاملا متفاوت هستند.
در لحظه‌ای که او از پناهگاه امن خود در ایالات متحده به مردم گفت به خیابان‌ها بیایید و اعتراض کنید، مردم از قبل در شمار عظیم در حال اعتراض بودند.
درباره توهم این که نتیجه اعتراضات رضا پهلوی باشد، به نظر من این مطمئن‌ترین نشانه این است که این مرد واقعاً ذهنیت دموکراتیک ندارد.
پهلوی به مفهوم قدیمی سلطنتی اشرافی و شبه فئودالی باور دارد که نوعی سلسله موروثی است و حالا نوبت اوست.
درباره شورای ملی مقاومت ایران، در تمام اظهارات خانم رجوی کاملا روشن است که او آینده ای را تصور می کند که در آن یک نظام سیاسی واقعا دموکراتیک وجود دارد که بر پایه حاکمیت قانون و دارای یک قوه قضاییه مستقل از دولت است، چیزی که به نظر نمی رسد رضا پهلوی به آن اشاره ای کرده باشد.
در طرح مورد نظر خانم رجوی برای آینده ایران تمرکز ویژه‌ای بر برابری جنسیتی وجود دارد. من هیچ نشانه‌ای نمی‌بینم که در ذهنیت پهلوی و حامیانش چیزی حتی نزدیک به برابری جنسیتی وجود داشته باشد.
You know, Iran right now seems to be in turmoil. There's a midst of this nationwide uprising. There are activities going on in more than 200 cities there. As you look at that, I know you focused on the region a great deal in the past. As you look at that, is that organic? Is that just magically popping up? Or is there an organized effort? Or is it kind of a hybrid, a little bit of both?
Oh, it's a hybrid. It's a fusion, Tim, of the necessary two components: the feeling, the resentment, the instinct to rebel and to be free. That is the autonomous expression of people's will. The feeling is, if you like, spontaneous. The fact of the sheer scale, the geographic spread, the organization and the intensity of the protests, of course, owe much to organization. And part of the claim of the principal opposition, or what I regard as the principal opposition in Iran, namely the National Council of the Resistance of Iran, is that in addition to a thirst for democracy, overthrowing the regime requires a well-oiled domestic machine. And I think what you're seeing now, on a scale far exceeding anything before, is the coming together of those two components.
The reports coming out of Iran suggest the current regime is responding to these protests with sheer brutality. And it was interesting. I sat down with the foreign minister of Oman last week. I was in Muscat, and he acknowledged he had been in Iran the day before, in Tehran, meeting with the government officials, and he acknowledged, yes, people are dying. He's telling me directly, yes, I met with Tehran yesterday. Yes, they acknowledge. Since that time, state government in Iran has acknowledged, yes, more than 3,000, more than 3,100 people have died. The one point of contention is the state television in Iran is saying, well, about 2,500 of those have been people trying to protect us, the security people of their government. And so my question to you is, are the numbers coming out of there accurate? Are you seeing evidence of that brutality we keep hearing about? And is this going to discourage the protesters? It always has in the past, and nobody wants to die. So when they go out into the streets, there's a very real possibility, if these reports are true, that they could die.
Well, first of all, I would say the deaths and the disappearances are not imaginary. They aren't illusions. They aren't some mythical creation of enemies of the Ayatollah. They reflect the reality. They have happened. They are happening. If the regime has its way, Tim, they will continue to happen, because that's the only way that the regime does business, to brutalize, to terrorize, to intimidate. That's the first thing. Secondly, obviously nobody within the context and against the backdrop of a closed regime, a totalitarian dictatorship, can ever be certain on numbers. But what we can say is that there are domestic sources that have, through modern technology, become international sources that validate the claim that very large numbers of people have been killed by the regime. And then finally, I suppose I would say, this is really the third point, there is a debate as to whether this brutality, this repression, this terrorization is a reflection of strength of the regime or of weakness. And my submission, and your viewers will form their own judgment, is that it reflects weakness. My overall sense is that the regime reacts this way with a kind of frenzied mass homicide precisely because it is anxious, it is worried, it fears the forces of freedom.
Let's shift gears just a little bit, because 1979 was when the current regime came to power. The mullahs overthrew the Shah of Iran. But that happened with a public who didn't necessarily understand where they were headed with the change in regime, but they knew that they did not like the Shah. What we see now, December 28th, about a week after these protests began at the end of the year, the Shah's son, who is now an older gentleman himself, but the Shah's son came out and said, well, people should take to the streets, which they already had a week before, but people should take to the streets and protest. And it seems as though he is positioning himself as the logical heir, that if there is a change of regime, let's go back to his dad, the Shah. He has labeled himself the Crown Prince.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Mr. Pahlavi is, I'm afraid, a sadly deluded soul. That may be the logical outcome in his misguided mind, but I'm afraid his mind and the truth on the ground are two totally different things. My fear is that Mr. Pahlavi's relationship with reality is at best that of a nodding acquaintance in a leap year. A nodding acquaintance in a leap year. I don't think he remotely understands what you just said in the preface to your question to me, Tim, which is that at the point at which he said to people, go out on the streets and protest, which he was presumably saying from his safe haven in the United States, people had already been doing so. My dear chap, Mr. Pahlavi, you're very late to the party, old boy. You missed the boat, or if you ever caught a bus, you missed this one. People were already protesting in enormous numbers. So that's the first point. Secondly, on the question of him being the logical outcome of the protests, that I think is the surest indication that the man doesn't have a truly democratic mindset. In the case of the NCRI, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, it's, in my view, inspirational and brilliant leader, doesn't talk about herself. She doesn't play her own name in aid. She doesn't say, I should be the leader. It's not I, or me. It's we. Mr. Pahlavi seems still to subscribe to the old royal, aristocratic, almost, if you will, feudalistic notion that there is a hierarchy of entitlement and it's somehow his turn.
Let's contrast those two for a minute. Let's contrast those two for a minute, because the baby Shah has referred to himself and now has the media referring to himself as the Crown Prince. Now, the very definition of Crown Prince is that you are the heir, that you are the anticipated and logical heir to the throne, no matter what nation on earth you are. And so he has anointed himself as the Crown Prince. At the same time, he is saying he's in favor, if he should be the one to take over, of a secular democracy. To me, Those two things are very different. Wait, I am the crown prince. I am the monarch. Oh, by the way, I like democracy too. Which is it?
Well, I think we should be told that not only are those two things, Tim, very different, they are logically incompatible with each other. I mean, in theory, if one wants to take a sort of philosophical approach, things that are different can nevertheless be reconciled. I don't think that these two things can be reconciled. He appears to be saying, I am now the legitimate leader. And there are supporters of his who are, in small numbers, admittedly, holding up placards glorifying the Shah. Now, he's on the other hand saying, well, I'm a Democrat. I've looked at the program for a so-called transition to democracy that he has unveiled, and there are very serious flaws in it, Tim. First of all, there is no provision for a separation of powers, which is a key tenet of a functioning democracy. Second, there is an intended arrogation of very large-scale powers to the leader of the national uprising, capital L, capital N, capital U, leader of national uprising, and he has christened himself that leader and proposes, under new arrangements, a great arrogation of powers to him. That isn't democracy, it's the antithesis of democracy. And finally, I think I would say simply this. He does not propose a governing framework that is in any way inclusive of other people. It seems to be a kind of reversion to an aristocratic notion that there is a small elite, he's at its apogee, he leads, you follow. I have news for Mr. Pahlavi. There are many descriptions of that philosophy, but democratic isn't one of them.
Now, let's contrast that. You mentioned the NCRI, and let's contrast that with Ms. Rajavi, and they have a 10-point plan. Their blueprint for what the future would be is very different. How is it different?
Well, it's different in several respects. First of all, people who are worried about how reliably and quickly a transition to democracy will take place will be, I think, greatly reassured that the NCRI envisages a 6-month transition, at the end of which there will be democratic elections and the creation of a functioning constituent assembly reflecting those elections. By contrast, Mr. Pahlavi is talking of anything up to 3 years, not 6 months, but 36 months transition. So that's the first significant difference. I think the second significant difference is that in all the utterances of Mrs. Rajavi of the NCRI, it is clear that she envisages and the NCRI favours a genuinely democratic polity in which there is an underpinning of the rule of law, a judiciary independent of the state, which Mr. Pahlavi does not appear to signpost, freedom of the press, a separation between church, if you will, and state, a non-nuclear republic, and very importantly, in Mrs. Rajavi's intended blueprint for the future of Iran, there is a focus on gender equality. I don't get the sense that there's anything remotely approximating to gender equality in the mindset of Mr. Pahlavi and his supporters. So in short order, in a necessarily brief soundbite answer to your question, I hope your viewers can tell from what I've said that there are really very sharp, pointed, meaningful differences between the autocracy at best, if not dictatorship, favoured by Mr. Pahlavi, and the thoroughgoing democratic settlement that the NCRI is campaigning to achieve.